The vast emptiness of space stretched before Captain Jack Reed's viewport as he guided his ship, the Wanderer, through the uncharted regions of the Outer Rim. The small exploration vessel hummed quietly around him, its systems working perfectly after 3 months of deep space travel. Jack liked these quiet moments when it was just him, his ship, and the endless stars. "Captain, I'm picking up something interesting," the ship's AI announced, breaking the peaceful silence. "There's an unmarked planet ahead. It's not in any of our databases." Jack sat up straighter in his captain's chair, his blue eyes brightening with interest. "Show me," he ordered, and a detailed hologram appeared before him. The planet looked beautiful, swirling blues and greens reminded him of Earth, though the landmasses were completely different. "Run a full scan," Jack commanded while studying the hologram. The planet seemed perfect for colonization at first glance. Earth-like gravity, breathable atmosphere, and abundant plant life. But something must have kept it off the maps. In his 10 years of exploration, Jack had learned that untouched paradise worlds usually had hidden dangers. The AI's scan results started flowing across his screen. Atmosphere is 23% oxygen, 75% nitrogen, very similar to Earth standards. Temperature ranges from -10 to 35 degrees Celsius. Dense vegetation covers approximately 70% of the surface. "But sir," the AI paused, which was unusual. "You should see this." New data appeared on the screen, showing readings of the planet's wildlife. Jack's eyes widened as he read the results. The planet wasn't just teeming with life. It was home to some of the most dangerous predators ever recorded. At the top of the food chain was a species that the ship's computer struggled to classify. "These readings can't be right," Jack muttered, running the scans again. "Check them against the Galactic Council's threat database." After a moment, the AI responded, "Match found. The dominant predator species matches descriptions of shadowclaws, classified as Category X threats by the Galactic Council. Only 12 species in known space hold this classification. Sir, we should report this finding and leave the area immediately." But Jack couldn't look away from the readings. The shadowclaws showed incredible adaptability. They could change their body temperature to hide from thermal sensors, alter their skin color for perfect camouflage, and move faster than most tracking systems could follow. Their intelligence ratings were off the charts for a predator species, yet all attempts at contact had ended in disaster. "Pull up the council records on previous encounters," Jack said, his curiosity getting the better of him. The reports that appeared made his blood run cold. 3 different civilizations had tried to establish research bases on the planet. None of the bases lasted more than a week. The few survivors spoke of shadows that moved like lightning, of creatures that could think and plan, and of an intelligence that seemed to understand and counter every defensive measure. "Sir," the AI interrupted his reading. "Council protocol requires us to mark this planet for quarantine and leave immediately. Should I begin plotting a return course?" Jack stared at the beautiful planet below. Something about this didn't add up. How could a species evolve to be both this intelligent and this aggressive? Every other predator species they'd encountered had shown signs of social behavior once they reached higher intelligence levels. Why would these be different? "Not yet," he decided. "We'll maintain orbit and conduct more detailed scans. The Council will want as much information as possible for the quarantine file." He knew he was stretching the rules, but his instincts told him there was more to this story. The ship settled into a high orbit, its sensors focused on the world below. Jack spent hours studying the data, watching patterns emerge in the Shadowclaw's movements. They weren't random attacks. There was purpose, organization. These weren't mindless killers. They were protecting something. "Log entry," Jack spoke clearly. "Day 92 of Outer Rim exploration. We've discovered an unmarked planet, coordinates being logged separately. Initial scans show Category X predator species present. But something's different about this one. I'm seeing signs of social structure, coordinated behavior. This could be the discovery of the decade, if we can just figure out how to understand them." He didn't know it yet, but this log entry would later be marked as the beginning of one of the most significant first contact events in human history. For now, though, Jack Reed simply watched the planet spin below him, unaware that fate was about to give him a much closer look at the mysteries he hoped to solve. Just one more atmospheric reading, Jack muttered to himself as he guided the Wanderer lower into the planet's sky. He knew he was pushing his luck. The ship wasn't designed for extended atmospheric flight on high-gravity worlds, but the readings he'd gotten from orbit were too interesting to ignore. The Wanderer's hull creaked as it pushed through thick clouds. Jack's screens filled with data about air composition, temperature patterns, and weather systems. Everything looked perfect for supporting life. Too perfect, almost, as if someone had terraformed the planet. But the records showed no sign of advanced civilization ever settling here. Suddenly, red warning lights flashed across his control panel. "Captain," the ship's AI announced, its usual calm voice carrying a note of urgency, "we're picking up unusual energy readings from the surface. They're interfering with our—" The AI's voice cut off mid-sentence. Jack's hands flew across the controls as every screen in the cockpit went dark. For a terrifying moment, the only light came from the alien sun filtering through the clouds outside. "Emergency restart," Jack commanded, but nothing happened. The ship's backup systems should have kicked in automatically. Instead, the Wanderer hung in the air for one horrible second before the engines died completely. They were falling. Jack's training kicked in. Without power, the Wanderer was just a very expensive metal box, but it still had emergency glide capabilities. He grabbed the manual control stick that every exploration vessel carried for exactly this situation. His muscles strained as he fought to level the ship's descent. Trees rushed up to meet them, massive alien plants with purple-tinted leaves that would have been beautiful if they weren't about to crash through them. Jack aimed for a small clearing he spotted through breaks in the canopy. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than slamming directly into the forest. Come on," he growled, pulling back on the stick with all his strength. The clearing grew larger in his view. They were coming in too fast. But if he could just... The impact threw him against his safety harness. Metal screamed as the Wanderer's hull scraped across the ground. Through the viewport, Jack watched trees snap like twigs as several tons of spaceship plowed through the alien forest. His head slammed forward, then back, and bright spots danced in his vision. When the ship finally stopped moving, Jack hung in his harness, breathing hard. His whole body ached, but a quick check showed nothing was broken. The same couldn't be said for the Wanderer. "Status report," he called out automatically, then remembered the AI was dead. The silence that answered him was eerie after so many months of having the computer's constant companionship. Jack unstrapped himself carefully and began checking systems manually. The results weren't good. Main power was completely dead. Backup power wasn't responding. The emergency beacon was crushed. He found its remains in a twisted heap of metal near what used to be the communication array. "Great," he muttered, looking through the cracked viewport at the alien forest. "No power, no communication, and I'm stranded on a planet full of deadly predators. Perfect." He pulled out his emergency survival kit, standard issue for all exploration captains. Inside, he found basic medical supplies, a water purifier, emergency rations for 2 weeks, and a small energy pistol with 2 charge packs. Not much to work with, but it would have to do. A sound from outside made him freeze. Something large was moving through the forest, heading toward the crash site. The trees shook, and Jack caught glimpses of movement. Fast, fluid motion that reminded him of Earth's big cats. He had read all the reports about shadow claws, but reading about them and being stranded on their home planet were very different things. The movement outside grew closer, and Jack realized he had to make a choice: stay in the broken ship and hope it provided enough protection, or try to find better shelter before night fell. More sounds came from the forest. Different directions now. The crash had attracted attention. Jack checked his pistol's charge and took a deep breath. He'd survived worse situations in his career, though maybe none quite this bad. Well, he said to himself, trying to stay calm, I wanted to study them up close. Looks like I'm going to get my chance. He gathered his supplies and prepared to step out into an alien world where he was no longer the top of the food chain. Jack moved quietly through the alien forest, keeping his back to large trees whenever he stopped to check his surroundings. The purple leaves above him filtered the sunlight, creating strange shadows that seemed to move even when nothing was there. He'd found a small cave about half a kilometer from the crash site. Not ideal, but better than staying in the broken ship. The sound of rushing water caught his attention. A stream would be useful for both drinking and washing, assuming the water wasn't toxic to humans. He changed direction, moving carefully toward the sound. That's when he heard it. A low, rumbling growl followed by the sound of something large thrashing in water. Jack's first instinct was to run the other way, but he noticed something odd about the noises. They weren't hunting sounds. They seemed more like sounds of pain. This is a bad idea, he muttered to himself, but moved forward anyway. The survival manual specifically said to avoid investigating strange noises on unknown planets, but Jack had always trusted his instincts, and right now, they were telling him to look. He crouched behind a fallen tree and peered over it. The scene before him made his breath catch. A shadow claw lay half in, half out of the stream, much larger than the scan data had suggested. Its 6 limbs were powerfully built, each ending in retractable claws that looked sharp enough to slice through metal. But what caught Jack's attention was its color. Shifting patterns of gray and silver that seemed to ripple across its skin like storm clouds. The creature was hurt. A deep gash ran along its side, and one of its rear legs was trapped under a fallen tree branch. As Jack watched, it tried again to free itself, its movements growing weaker with each attempt. The shadow claw suddenly went still. Its head turned, and Jack found himself staring into eyes that glowed with intelligence. They were an intense amber color, with pupils that adjusted like a camera lens focusing. Jack knew he should run. Every report, every protocol, every bit of training said to escape while he had the chance. But those eyes, they weren't the eyes of a mindless killer. There was pain in them, yes, but also something else. Curiosity, perhaps even fear. The creature made a different sound now. Not a growl, but a softer, almost chirping noise. It wasn't threatening. If anything, it sounded almost questioning. Okay, Jack said softly, slowly standing up with his hands raised. I'm either about to make first contact or become lunch. He kept his voice calm and steady as he stepped out from behind the tree. The shadow claw tracked his movement but didn't attack. It made the chirping sound again, then looked meaningfully at its trapped leg. Jack couldn't believe what he was seeing. The creature was asking for help. Moving with deliberate slowness, Jack set down his pistol. I'm going to help you, he said, knowing the words meant nothing to the creature, but hoping his tone would convey his intentions. But you have to stay calm. The shadow claw's skin rippled, the gray patterns shifting to include flecks of blue. It remained still as Jack approached, though its muscles were clearly tense. Jack examined the situation. The branch was heavy, but he could see a way to leverage it off using a smaller branch as a fulcrum. This might hurt, he warned, setting up his makeshift lever. When he finally lifted the branch, the shadow claw pulled its leg free with surprising grace despite its injury. Jack expected it to flee or attack once it was free, but instead, it stayed where it was, studying him with those intelligent eyes. The wound in its side was still bleeding. Jack slowly reached for his medical kit. You already haven't eaten me, so maybe. He pulled out a container of universal healing gel, designed to work on most carbon-based life forms. The shadow claw watched as he opened the container. Jack held it out, letting the creature smell it. After a moment, the shadow claw's skin shifted to include patterns of lighter gray, and it relaxed slightly. I'll take that as a yes, Jack said, and carefully began applying the gel to the wound. The shadow claw shivered but didn't pull away. Its skin was surprisingly warm to the touch, and Jack could feel powerful muscles beneath it. As he worked, Jack noticed more details about the creature. Its reactions were measured, controlled. This wasn't a simple predator. Every movement showed signs of higher thinking. "I think I'll call you Storm," he said as he finished treating the wound. "Because of your coloring." The shadow claw, Storm, made that chirping sound again, and Jack could have sworn it sounded like approval. 3 days had passed since Jack first helped Storm, and each day brought new surprises. The shadow claw hadn't left after being treated. Instead, it had followed Jack back to his cave, moving with a slight limp but otherwise recovering quickly. Jack sat at the cave entrance, watching the alien sunrise paint the purple forest in golden light. Storm lay nearby, its massive form curled in a way that reminded Jack of a sleeping tiger. The creature's color had shifted to match the cave's rocky walls, a habit Jack now recognized as a sign of feeling safe. "You know," Jack said, writing in his emergency logbook, "everyone back home thinks your kind are just mindless killers. But that's not true, is it?" Storm's head lifted at the sound of Jack's voice. The shadow claw had quickly learned to recognize when Jack was talking to it. Its skin rippled with patterns of silver, something Jack had noticed happened often during their interactions. A sudden rustling in the nearby bushes caught their attention. Storm's head turned sharply, and its skin shifted to darker patterns. A small, rabbit-like creature hopped into view. Before Jack could blink, Storm had moved, not to attack, but to position itself between Jack and the potential threat. "I'm not in danger from that," Jack said, chuckling. "But thank you." Storm made a series of clicking sounds, its head tilted in what Jack had learned was curiosity. Over the past days, they had begun developing a basic form of communication. Clicks meant questions. Chirps meant agreement or friendly intentions. Low rumbles were warnings about danger. Jack pointed to himself, then made an eating motion. "Food," he said clearly. Then he pointed to the rabbit-like creature. "Food." Storm's skin flickered with understanding. Another pattern Jack had started recognizing. The shadow claw moved with incredible speed, and moments later returned with 2 of the creatures. Instead of eating them both, Storm placed one in front of Jack. "You're learning to share," Jack said, genuinely touched. "Thank you." He had his emergency rations, but he knew he needed to learn which local foods were safe. Storm had been watching him closely whenever he ate his rations, and this wasn't the first time the creature had tried to share food. As they ate, Jack noticed Storm deliberately making its movements slower, more obvious, just as Jack had been doing when approaching the shadow claw. They were mirroring each other, learning from each other. Later that day, Storm led Jack through the forest. They moved quietly, with Storm occasionally stopping to make sure Jack was keeping up. They reached a high point overlooking a valley, and Jack's breath caught at what he saw. Below them, a group of shadow claws moved through the trees. Their movements were coordinated, purposeful. Some carried food to others. Younger ones played under the watchful eyes of adults. It was a community, a society. "That's why you're so intelligent," Jack whispered. "You're not just predators. You're social creatures." Storm made a soft chirping sound, its skin showing patterns Jack had never seen before, swirling designs that seemed almost like writing. Jack pulled out his logbook again. "The reports were all wrong," he wrote. "The shadow claws aren't aggressive by nature. They're defensive. Those research bases, they must have seemed like invasions, but when approached peacefully." He looked at Storm, who was watching him write with obvious interest. Storm reached out one of its clawed limbs, carefully touching the logbook. Jack held it up, showing the writing. The shadow claw studied it intently, then used a claw to draw similar patterns in the dirt. Jack's excitement grew. "You have your own writing system, don't you? Those patterns in your skin, they're not just camouflage. They're communication." Storm's skin rippled with the silver patterns again, and it made a series of happy chirping sounds. For the first time, Jack felt like they were truly beginning to understand each other. As the sun set, Jack looked at his new friend and smiled. "You know, Storm, I think we're about to change how the entire galaxy thinks about your species. We just have to figure out how to show them what I've learned." A week into their friendship, Jack woke to Storm's warning rumble. The Shadow Claw stood at the cave entrance, its skin shifting to dark, aggressive patterns. Outside, the purple forest had gone completely silent. Never a good sign on any planet. "What is it?" Jack whispered, grabbing his emergency kit. Storm's head turned slightly, making quick clicking sounds that Jack now recognized as a danger signal. Something was coming. Suddenly, 3 larger shadow claws burst from the trees. Their skin patterns were angry reds and blacks, completely different from Storm's usual colors. They moved with aggressive purpose, spreading out to surround the cave. Storm stepped forward, positioning itself between Jack and the newcomers. It made a series of complex sounds, clicks, chirps, and growls mixed together. The other shadow claws responded with harsh, sharp sounds that made Storm's skin ripple with dark patterns. "They're challenging you for your territory," Jack realized, remembering what he'd learned about Shadow Claw society. "And I'm making it worse by being here." The largest of the rival Shadow Claws lunged forward. Storm met the attack head-on, their bodies colliding with incredible force. The sound of claws meeting claws rang through the forest. The other 2 attackers began circling, looking for an opening. Jack knew he had to act. Storm was strong, but 3 against 1 weren't good odds. He pulled out his emergency flares. He'd been saving them for rescue, but this was more important. As one of the circling shadow claws moved to attack Storm from behind, Jack threw a flare. The bright red light exploded between the attackers, startling them. Their skin patterns shifted rapidly as they tried to process this new threat. Storm took advantage of their confusion, knocking one attacker back with a powerful sweep of its claws. "Storm!" Jack shouted, pointing to some loose rocks above the cave. Storm's eyes followed his gesture, and understanding flickered across its skin. While Jack threw another flare to keep the attackers distracted, Storm leaped up the rock face with incredible agility. The 3 rival shadow claws regrouped, focusing on Jack now. Their skin showed patterns he'd never seen before, confusion mixed with anger. They clearly didn't know what to make of a human fighting alongside a shadow claw. Jack grabbed a long branch, using it to keep the attackers at bay while Storm got into position. He could see his friend's skin blending perfectly with the rocks above. The attackers hadn't noticed, too focused on this strange human who wasn't running away in fear. "You know," Jack said, keeping their attention, "there's a reason humans survived on a planet full of predators." He backed up slowly, drawing them forward. "We learned to work together." Storm chose that moment to strike. With one powerful movement, it dislodged the loose rocks. The falling stones sent the rival shadow claws scattering. Storm landed beside Jack, and together they faced the attackers. The largest rival made one more attempt to attack, but Storm and Jack moved in perfect sync. As Storm blocked the attack, Jack used his branch to trip the attacker, sending it sprawling. The other 2 shadow claws backed away, their skin showing patterns of submission. The leader got up slowly, looking between Storm and Jack. Its skin shifted to neutral colors, a sign of accepting defeat. With a final series of clicks that Jack guessed were warnings, the 3 retreated into the forest. Storm's skin rippled with victory patterns, and it made happy chirping sounds. Jack laughed, dropping his makeshift weapon. "We did it. That was amazing." Storm touched its forehead to Jack's shoulder, a gesture of trust they'd developed. Its skin showed the silver patterns that Jack now knew meant friendship. They had defended their territory together, human and Shadow Claw working as one. The forest slowly came back to life around them, its normal sounds returning. Jack sat down heavily, his heart still racing from the fight. Storm curled protectively around him, its skin shifting to calm, peaceful patterns. "You know what this means, don't you?" Jack said, patting Storm's side. We just proved the humans and Shadow Claws can work together, actually work together. He pulled out his logbook, eager to record what had happened. No one's going to believe this back home. 2 weeks after the crash, Jack woke to Storm making an unusual sound, a mix between a warning rumble and a curious click. The Shadow Claw stood at the cave entrance, its head tilted upward. Jack joined his friend and heard it too, the unmistakable roar of engines. "They found us," Jack said, his feelings mixed. He should have been relieved, but instead he felt worried. This could be trouble, Storm. 3 rescue ships descended through the purple canopy, much larger than Jack's crashed Wanderer. Their weapon systems were clearly visible, standard procedure for Category X planet landings. Storm's skin rippled with concerned patterns, but it stayed calm, trusting Jack's relatively relaxed stance. "Captain Reed," a voice boomed through external speakers. "Stay where you are. We're coming to get you out." Jack stepped forward, waving his arms. "Wait. Hold your fire. The situation isn't what you think." The rescue ships landed in a triangle formation around the area, their weapons tracking every movement. Armored troops poured out, led by a tall commander in heavy combat gear. Storm's skin showed alert patterns, but it remained beside Jack, matching his calm demeanor. "Captain Reed," the commander called out, her voice tense. "Please move away from the Shadow Claw slowly. We'll cover you." "That won't be necessary, Commander," Jack replied, placing a hand on Storm's side. "This is Storm. He's my friend." The rescue team froze in confusion. Their weapons remained aimed at Storm, whose skin now showed the silver patterns Jack had learned meant friendship. The commander's helmet tilted in disbelief. "Sir," she said carefully, "you may be suffering from crash trauma. These creatures are Category X threats. They've killed hundreds of people." Jack shook his head. They were defending their home. "Look." He turned to Storm and made a series of clicking sounds they'd developed. Storm responded by changing its skin patterns to peaceful swirls and sitting down calmly. "Impossible," one of the soldiers whispered. The commander held up her hand for silence, studying the scene before her. "Commander," Jack said, "I've lived among them for 2 weeks. They're not mindless killers. They're intelligent, social beings. Storm here has protected me, shared food with me, even taught me their basic communication methods." As if to demonstrate, Storm's skin rippled with the complex patterns that Jack now knew were a form of writing. The soldiers murmured among themselves as they watched. "Sir," the commander said, her voice softer now, "even if what you're saying is true, we have orders. This planet is classified as extremely dangerous. We need to get you out of here." Jack stood his ground. "Then reclassify it. Look around you. Do you see any aggression? Any attack? Storm could have killed me a dozen times over. Instead, we fought together against real threats. We've learned to communicate, to understand each other." Storm made a series of gentle chirping sounds, and to everyone's amazement, several more Shadow Claws emerged peacefully from the forest. Their skin patterns matched Storm's peaceful display. They moved slowly, deliberately non-threatening. The commander slowly lowered her weapon. "In 20 years of space rescue, I've never seen anything like this." She turned to her team. "Stand down, but stay alert." Jack smiled. "Commander, give me 1 hour. Let me show you what I've learned about them. These beings aren't our enemies. They could be our greatest allies in understanding this sector of space." The commander hesitated, then nodded. "1 hour, Captain Reed. But make it good. The council won't be easy to convince." Storm moved forward, its skin showing the teaching patterns Jack had seen when it first showed him its community. The other Shadow Claws arranged themselves in a display of social structure: parents, hunters, guardians. "Trust me, Commander," Jack said, pulling out his logbook full of observations. "What I have to show you will change everything we thought we knew about interspecies contact." 6 months after his crash landing, Jack stood before the Galactic Council. The great chamber was filled with representatives from 100 worlds, all gathered to hear his testimony. But Jack wasn't alone. Beside him stood Storm, its skin showing calm, dignified patterns that impressed even the most skeptical council members. "Members of the council," Jack began, "6 months ago, I crashed on a world you had classified as too dangerous for contact. Today, I stand before you with proof that we were wrong about the Shadow Claws, just as we've been wrong about so many species before." The main screen behind him showed footage from his time on the planet. Storm sharing food, teaching Jack their communication methods, defending their territory together. The council watched in silence as years of assumptions were challenged by simple acts of friendship. "The Shadow Claws aren't mindless predators," Jack continued. "They have a complex society, their own form of writing through skin patterns, and a deep understanding of their world. What we thought was aggression was simply protection of their homes and families, something any of us would do." Storm stepped forward, its skin displaying the formal patterns used for important ceremonies. The council chamber filled with murmurs as Storm began to demonstrate the complexity of Shadow Claw communication. Patterns rippled across its skin like living poetry, telling stories that needed no translation to understand their beauty. "But more than that," Jack said, "they want to learn from us, just as we can learn from them. Storm here has already mastered basic human gestures and can understand hundreds of our words. Their species' ability to adapt and learn is extraordinary." An elderly council member stood up. "Captain Reed, your evidence is compelling, but how can we be sure other Shadow Claws will be as peaceful as your friend?" Jack smiled. "I'm glad you asked." He activated another screen, showing the new research base on the planet. Human scientists worked side by side with Shadow Claws, each teaching the other. Young Shadow Claws played with human children under the watchful eyes of both species' parents. "In the past 3 months," Jack explained, "we've established peaceful contact with 12 different Shadow Claw communities. Every single one has shown the same intelligence, curiosity, and willingness to communicate that Storm showed me. They don't want war. They never did. They want understanding." Storm's skin shifted to show the silver patterns of friendship, then changed to display complex mathematical equations the scientists had learned from the Shadow Claws. The council members leaned forward, fascinated. "Therefore," Jack said, "I formally request that this council reclassify the Shadow Claw homeworld from a Category X threat to a protected intelligent species reserve, and that we establish permanent diplomatic relations with their species." The council chamber erupted in discussion. Storm remained calm, its skin showing patterns of patience that Jack had come to know so well. After what seemed like hours, the council president stood. "Captain Reed," she announced, "your evidence is irrefutable. More than that, the very presence of your friend Storm here, standing peacefully in our chamber, proves your points better than any words could. The council votes unanimously to approve your request." Jack felt Storm's happiness through the subtle changes in its skin patterns. Around the chamber, representatives began to applaud. Some even approached to get a closer look at Storm, who gracefully demonstrated more of its species' remarkable abilities. Later, standing on a balcony overlooking the capital city, Jack turned to Storm. "We did it, friend. We changed everything." Storm's skin showed the now familiar patterns of friendship, trust, and joy. A group of young aliens gathered below, pointing excitedly at Storm. The Shadow Claw carefully shifted its colors to create beautiful patterns that made the children laugh in delight. Jack watched, remembering how far they'd come from that first fearful moment by the stream. "You know what the best part is," Jack said to Storm. "This is just the beginning. Think of all the other species out there, just waiting for someone to look past their dangerous reputation and see who they really are." Storm's skin rippled with patterns of adventure and possibility. A new set of symbols they had created together, meaning more friends to find. Jack laughed, understanding perfectly. The sun set over the capital city, painting the sky in colors not so different from Storm's homeworld. Somewhere out there, Humans and Shadow Claws were learning from each other, playing together, building something new. All because one human and one Shadow Claw had chosen to trust instead of fear.